Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Survivor 49 following episode 6, the final episode of the pre-merge, which was an interesting episode, I'll put it that way, where they definitely shook up the format from other New Era seasons by having another tride swap. And obviously, while it was kind of dumb having these trides of 4 to where it very much set up someone to be screwed over, depending on what happened. I think considering that it does at least get around the dumb semantics of Mergatory, where it does look like next week we'll just be getting a normal merge, I think I'm fine enough with it, even though it did lead to some interesting results, but we'll get to that soon enough. But we have 12 people to talk about, and spend some more time. Let's go into the video. So starting off at number 12, we have the latest boot from the season, and here we have Shannon. And I feel like this was definitely coming. Shannon had been set up for downfall now for quite a bit now. Literally ever since the swap, I feel like she was pretty primed for a downfall here with Alexis Sage talking about how she's fake. You even have you like Steven also saying the same thing. And then in this episode, you have them once again ending up on the same tribe here. And obviously, it just made sense for Shannon to go out considering all the setup that was there. And if we're talking about Shannon more generally, I do feel like she was a fine player for the most part, where I do feel like she was at least trying to play the game. We did see her like trying to scheme by trying to create this cross-tribe alliance on her first swap tribe, and also like really scrounging to play from the bottom, though I do feel like she really overestimated her social ability. I think we really saw her like trying to like just outright take control of the tribe and come off as pretty strong, as opposed to at least trying to come off a bit more amenable to the majority, to where it made sense why people were put off by her and really wanted to target her through that. And while she did seem to be in a fine spot in the original Uli tribe, it also seemed like she would have been voted out at any point after the swap had she ever gone the tribal, to where she never does survive a tribal over the course of the season, which is obviously an unfortunate stat, though at the same time I do feel like she did some things wrong to bring that about, and she's now out of the game to where she's here at number 12. And before we continue, I am once again partnering up with Russell Muscle TV to promote Idle Plays. Idle Plays is an online shop where you can purchase Survivor puzzles and practice them so that you can be the next challenge beast on Survivor. And with Survivor 50 just around the corner, you can purchase relics from Survivor history with my Creator Camp package, which includes the Labyrinth puzzle, the Slide puzzle, and Spencer's 5-piece puzzle from Survivor Cambodia. If all that sounds exciting to you, feel free to click the link in my description and start shopping now. And with that, we have 11 people left in the game to talk about. As usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. But at number 11, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on is still Sophie S., who, to her credit, she did get more to do in this episode than what she did before, where we do see her talking early on about how she's pretty sus of Nate, how she thinks that Nate is too low to Uli and that he can't be worked with. But then later pivoting to want to target Christina due to Christina like using her as a decoy target, how she doesn't like that. And along with that, we do see her also talking to Alex about working with him, to where, again, she does at least do stuff in this episode. Though at the same time, she's still like someone we don't really know anything about. She still hasn't gotten any personal content. And even the content she got in this episode, which was definitely more game focused than what it was before, felt pretty similar to the stuff she got in episode 2, where she also talked largely in response to her finding out that Matt wanted to target her, which again is just kind of one note. I feel like we haven't really gotten too many dimensions out of Sophie, where it's either like this like dumb stuff about reward, or it's about her being targeted. And while there's definitely an argument for her being at least one spot higher, considering she did get more to do this week, I still think it's a little too late. I still feel like she's someone who's just not that important to the actual season. And I just don't think she's going to succeed in what she wants to do. Where, again, with this talk about this Hina-Uli war, I would expect Hina to lose that battle and for Sophie to be a relatively early target due to that. So I'm still not feeling great about her. It's for that reason that she is here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, we have yet another person who I'm just not feeling it for them at this point. But at number 10, we do have Christina. And this was just kind of a weird episode for Christina here, where she does have this pretty notable moment on the mat before the reward challenge, where she ends up feeling dizzy, seemingly due to the heat that was affecting them that day. And she does end up being looked at by medical. And while she does get to talk about that, talking about how Survivor's hard and how she like felt all these things after hearing there's going to be another swap, it mostly felt circumstantial to me, where it felt like she got that content because it was at least a notable moment there. But beyond that, she then gets negativity, where we do see her like talking to the fellow Hinas about how they want to use Sophie S as a decoy target to make Nate feel comfortable, only for Sophie S to not like that and to instead want to target Christina, which is obviously not a great look there either. We do see Sophie S later talking to Alex about working with him instead. And while I'm not entirely sure whether this plan would have gone through had their tribe gone the tribal, I still think Christina is someone who remains a bit under-edited. I feel like the show is not really going out of its way to highlight her. It feels like she's only being shown when it's 100% necessary. And even then, she's still getting negativity, where considering that she did have this medical issue that would make her come off pretty sympathetic, she still gets dunked on by Sophie S by the end of it, to where I feel like on the whole, it's still not a great look for Christina. She's still someone who I'm not feeling that great about. And while I did put her one spot higher due to her having like that little bit of sympathy from the medical issue, I think the fact that she got negativity aside from that was enough to where I couldn't really have her any higher than number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have yet another person who I'm just kind of out on at this point, but at number 9 we do have Jawan. And I'll be honest, I think of these people in this bottom grouping, I actually think Jawan's probably the most likely to be the next boot here. I feel like he definitely has the setup to be a merge boot on the season, with him being somewhat of a bigger presence on the show while still getting this negativity and at least some setup to a downfall with Savannah like wanting to target him. And in many ways, this episode felt like a continuation of his content from before, where we once again have Savannah dunking on him, saying how she wants him gone and how he's at the bottom of Uli. But despite that, Jawan continues to profess his loyalty to Uli, saying how, oh, it's his Hina Uli war and I have to stick by him. And later saying that, oh, I love Steven a lot, but Steven is Hina and Hina is bad. So again, a lot of it did feel pretty one note there, though to his credit, he does actually vote out an Uli here. He does actually vote out Shannon by the end of it, even though it's because Shannon was voting for him and it was basically a choice between him and Shannon. But still, it's the bare minimum, I guess. But even with that, I still don't really have much faith in Jawan in terms of him actually winning. I feel like he's gotten so much negativity. I feel like his constant talk about remaining Uli strong is just kind of repetitive and also a bit frustrating, where you can clearly tell that he has these connections to the other side, but despite that, like, his own loyalty to Uli is preventing him from wanting to stick by like the likes of Steven and Matt, even Jason to a degree. And I feel like with all the setup to his downfall, I just don't have any faith in Jawan to actually win the season from this point on. And I would expect him to still be booted relatively soon. The reason he's above the likes of Sophie S and Christina is that he's at least got more screen time compared to them. I feel like he's at least a bigger role on the season compared to them, but still not a good role. And I still don't have any faith in him to win, which is why he's here at number 9. I'm moving on to number 8, and we're going now to someone who I still don't feel that great about in terms of their edit, even though they don't have as many issues as the people we already talked about. But at number 8, we do have MC. And I want to say straight up, first of all, that it seems like MC could have been massively screwed over in this episode, where, for one, she got a pretty bad swap here, being the only Hina on a tribe of people that are pretty solidly working together in Rizzo, Savannah, and Sophie B. And while she did have her own Beware advantage that she could have activated, this season decided to throw in a knowledge is power for some reason, because that's everyone's favorite advantage in the new era. And considering that Sophie B ended up finding it, it'd seem like that had this tribe gone to tribal here, that MC would have tried to use her idol, and then Sophie B would just use a knowledge of power, to where MC would have been a dead woman walking unless she somehow hit her shot in the dark, to where I do feel like MC was definitely coming into this tribe in a very rocky position here. Now I think on some level you can see why they would want to throw in a knowledge of power there, as we literally have a tribe where both MC and Rizzo have Beware advantages essentially, and they want to prevent a potential advantage get in situation on a tribe of 4. But at the same time, why have a tribe of 4 to begin with if you knew this was a possibility? And on top of that, if Alex had not used his idol and still had it, and they had some up and swap together, then you would have had 3 people on a tribe with a Beware advantage. So I do feel like at the end of the day, this entire tribe swap of swapping people into 4 is entirely ridiculous. And while the knowledge is power was meant to somewhat account for the fact that maybe more than one person would have a Beware advantage in this spot, it's still a pretty questionable decision regardless here. And we now have to live with a knowledge is power here. But all ranting aside, this was just kind of a fun episode for MC here, where she does talk about her idol and how she's on the bottom of the tribe. We do also see her talking to Rizzo, telling him that Sage had leaked his idol to the other tribe on the first swap. And again, that's at least some setup there. But beyond that, I feel like MC herself isn't really that big of a character. Not to mention the fact that she would have been completely screwed had they actually gone the tribal here. I don't think Rizzo would have actually gone along with it. And moving forward, I still don't feel like it's that great for her, where she hasn't really had that strong of an edit beforehand to really justify her being like this underdog that prevails over the Ulis. In general, I just don't feel that great about her to actually go on the win this season. But really, the most that I can talk about for her from this episode is the situation she was in that was brought on by production's decision to have tribes of 4. So it's for that reason that I have her here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and this person has actually gone down compared to last week, as I do worry about where this person is going moving forward. But at number 7, we do have Sage, and Sage gets her victory here. She does end up taking out Shannon here. She is able to get through and taking out Shannon, which has obviously been a major focus of her content for the last few episodes. And obviously that's a positive onto itself. Though with that said, I do think it also presents this question of where does Sage go next? Like, what is her storyline now that she's gotten out Shannon? Especially considering how much of that has taken up of her screen time. And I do feel like we've gotten some red flags in that regard, where we do see in this episode that MC essentially throws Sage under the bus on her new swap tribe, where she ends up telling Rizzo that Sage had told them about Rizzo's beware advantage. And through that, I would expect Sage to at least be more of a target in Rizzo's eyes now, and perhaps see Sage as not super loyal to Uli, mixing in the fact that Savannah's also on his Sage here, where Savannah also got content early on talking about how she was worried about Sage due to Sage throwing her name out there, to where I am expecting Sage to become a bigger target in Rizzo and Savannah's eyes at this point. And considering that Rizzo and Savannah seem to be more major characters on the season at this point, I would expect them to get a one-up on Sage if that battle comes through. And considering that is most of Sage's content, aside from throwing Shannon under the bus and being gross, is throwing Rizzo and Savannah under the bus, I do feel like that's probably going to be where she goes moving forward, where maybe she gets an emerge. She does try to flip the Hina, but is unsuccessful in doing so. To where, while Sage is someone who definitely was on the rise due to her getting more personal content and talking about targeting Shannon, I think the fact that Shannon is now out of the game makes it harder to see where she really goes from this point. And it's hard to see whether she'll be able to build upon the momentum that she had gotten from that whole storyline, to where, and that's a major reason why I decided to drop her here to number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and this person has technically moved up a spot compared to last week, even though I'm still not feeling that great about them moving forward. But at number 6, we do have Nate. And Nate had a somewhat interesting episode here where he ended up getting a pretty bad swap, being towards the bottom, being the only original Uli to go over to his group. And while we do see him trying to play from the bottom and coming up with this lie to distance himself from the original Uli, we see a lot of his other trimates kind of seeing through this, where the likes of Sophie S and Alex talk about how they're sus of Nate and how they think that he's going to be Uli strong, to where that's obviously not a great look, the fact that his plan doesn't seem to be working and he doesn't seem to fully realize that. And while Sophie S later directs attention over to Christina due to the whole decoy situation, I still feel like this was probably a net negative for Nate as a whole here. Definitely not a great look for him. And I think with there also being talk about how Nate is seen as the leader of Uli, that is probably going to bite him in the butt sooner rather than later. The fact that he is kind of being caught in his lies, the fact that he's not really getting to prop up his role as being the leader of Uli, where instead it's other people talking about him in that role. So I'm not feeling great about Nate at this point to actually win the season. Though again, I still feel like he has at least some legs moving forward compared to Sage, where I feel like Sage is just kind of done in terms of her role in the season. I feel like Nate at least still has some legs moving forward to where he is here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and unsurprisingly, it is the highest ranked member of Hina, and that is Steven. And I feel like this was a fine episode for Steven here, where he obviously gets a pretty bad swap, he's towards the bottom. We do see him bonding with Jawan for a lot of it, talking about how they're nerds and stuff. Though at the same time, it does seem kind of unsuccessful, where despite Jawan liking Steven, he is willing to put out Steven because Steven Hina bad. And while that turns around by the end of it, I feel like that doesn't really have much to do with what Steven's doing. It's more so due to Jawan being directly targeted by Shannon to where he felt the need to retaliate. So again, not really sure what that means for their relationship moving forward. But to Steven's credit, I feel like he still got a fine enough episode here where he got decent content of him at least trying to play from the bottom, and has his notable confessional saying how it's unclear whether his game will continue on this nice trajectory or crash out before it gets off the launch pad, alluding to the fact that he's a rocket scientist. So again, it was a fine episode for Steven. Not really enough to make him a contender, but I feel like he doesn't have as many negatives as the people we already talked about to where he is here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have the same top 4 as last week, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But number 4, I did decide to make a change here compared to last week, and at number 4 we do have Alex. And again, Alex had a fine episode here where he did get to talk about being on his new tribe, talking about being sus of Nate, and at least being open to working with Sophie Yes. He also gets a bit of an interesting moment where he ends up going fishing and talking about how Survivor's his great experience, which again is something, at least, though I feel like it doesn't really add to Alex's story per se. It's more so just this propaganda about Survivor being an experience and a journey. So again, take all that for what you will. But again, I feel like this was a fine episode for Alex here. He obviously got through the round all right. He's gonna make it to the merge. He's gonna probably be a big player for the near future. Though with that said, I feel like the top 3 people probably have more going on for them after this episode, to where I decided to drop Alex here to number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have someone who has moved up a spot compared to last week. And here we have the man, the myth, the legend, RIZGOD, Riz God Baby. And I feel like this was a fine episode for Rizzo here. Again, kind of having this fun moment of him going fishing, and or at least trying to go fishing, only for that to fail. Though I feel like he came out pretty endearing in that regard. And he even says that he's not a god of the water, but a god of this game. He also gets a bit of content with MC talking about how like they know about his beware advantage, which I feel like is something at least. Talks about how like he is fine with people knowing about his idol because he wants to be a man that strikes fear in others, which I feel like is a notable line there. And again, he was in a pretty fine spot on his new tribe here. It seems like he would have been pretty safe had they actually gone the tribal there. And I do feel like with the merge trying to creep up, I would expect Rizzo to start to play the game a bit more. I would expect him to start to become this bigger player. And obviously all those things are pretty good. It feels like we had a bit of a cooldown for him in the pre-merge, largely due to him not going the tribal, but still getting like this endearing content that sets him up to be like this big presence. And I feel like now that we're getting to the merge, I would expect him to start to pop up more. And in general, I feel pretty good about him in that regard. Though with that said, it's still not quite enough for me to crack him too high on the list. So because of that, I still have him here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and we have the same top 2 as last week. And unsurprisingly, it is the same order, but at number 2, we do have Sophie B. And again, I feel like this was a fun episode for Sophie B as well. Now, I think there's an argument that her content was more circumstantial compared to Rizzo's, where a lot of her content is her like talking about the reward, talking about how that's pretty good. But then later going on to find acknowledges power and saying how she plans to not tell anyone about it, which is obviously pretty notable there. And again, I feel like Sophie B is just there, obviously, and I think there's an argument for her being one spot below Rizzo. Though with that said, I still feel like she was a bigger character to this point. You obviously have the established relationship between Sophie B and Savannah, which I feel like is something that Rizzo is kind of lacking, even though he still has some relationships with Nate, at least, and they have at least talked about the relationship between Rizzo and Savannah, even though we haven't actually seen it. I feel like with Sophie B, we've at least seen the relationship with Savannah. I feel like that's going to be an important relationship on the season. In general, I still feel pretty confident about Sophie B. Though with that said, I still feel like there's a pretty clear number 1 in my eyes. So because of that, she is still here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 49 coming into the merge is still Savannah. And I feel like this episode didn't really do anything to lower my view of Savannah here. She was in a pretty good spot on her new tribe here, being part of the majority. She obviously has all these set up relationships with Sophie B and to a degree with Rizzo. And she still has this storyline of wanting to target Joanne here, where she talks once again about how she wants to take down Joanne. And I think the episode has really dunked on Joanne to the point where she feels pretty validated in that regard. And while outside of that, this episode didn't really move the needle for me when it came to Savannah. I feel like it didn't really need to. And in general, she's still someone who has been getting a consistent presence on the show. She has pretty consistent storylines. And I feel like with her not really having that much negativity outside just coming off as a bit mean-spirited and wanting to target Joanne, I feel like the show has largely backed up her claims in targeting Joanne there. And I feel like now that we're getting to the merge is where I would expect her to become more of a player here and someone who will really start to pop off. And while this episode didn't really do much to move the needle in terms of Savannah's story, I didn't feel like it really needed to, considering they didn't go to tribal, considering we didn't really see this big inflection point for Savannah. And I feel like I still feel the most confident about Savannah coming into this merge here, which is why I still have her here at number 1. And there we go. That'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week once the season has started, where we'll be getting into these players and seeing just how wrong I am about all these people. So be on the lookout for that. And I'm also going to be covering a whole bunch of shows coming up, including The Amazing Race and Hell's Kitchen, so be on the lookout for that as well. I'm on Patreon and have YouTube memberships. If you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.